Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio. You're listening to The Jay Shapiro Show.
Hello, everybody. This is Jay Shapiro. Thanks for listening. I have to admit that I find it difficult to discuss things that are happening here in Israel when the news, even here, is almost totally devoted to what's happening in the United States. The United States is going through a very compound crisis. First, there's the corona crisis, which is still with us, and now there's the rioting resulting from the police killing of a black man. To watch the way the streets in the United States have been taken over by rioters is really terrible, not only as a domestic problem, but also because good friends and allies of the United States, like Israel, don't like seeing what's happening on the streets of the United States. This program only airs once a week, so I must limit myself to discussing the issues facing Israel. And the big issue that's occupying the news is the possibility that the Israeli government will annex the Jordan Valley, which is part of the Holy Land assigned to Israel by the Trump plan. There are various opinions about how the Palestinian street will react to the annexation. There's no doubt that the Arab governments will pay lip service to the Palestinian cause by condemning Israel, but the real problem is how the Palestinians themselves will react. According to one group of so-called experts, the Palestinians will accept the situation because they're more interested in providing livelihood for their families, and many of them depend on Israel for that livelihood. Other so-called experts say there will be an outbreak of violence. I assume that our government will prepare for the more violent response, since that's the safest thing to do. There's no doubt that the possibility of annexing it in accordance with the Trump plan is a historic opportunity. It may not repeat itself, especially since there's an election this year in the United States. There's the possibility that Trump will be voted out of office, and the Democrats, who have said they're opposed to annexation, may take office. So we are living in very critical times, very historic times. Important decisions are going to have to be made. There's a Chinese curse. I hope you live in interesting times. I think that's happening to us. We are victims of the Chinese curse. These are indeed interesting times. I'll be back after the break.
G'day, I'm Jono Vandor.
And I'm Ross Nichols.
Join us on our program, Israel on My Mind, a show that broadcasts all the weekly goodness that flows like milk and honey from the Holy Land straight into your ears with humorous and happy news stories.
New shows are posted every Thursday at 7 p.m. Israel time, highlighting the lighter side and advancing a positive view of Israel here on Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to The Jay Shapiro Show.
You're back with Jay Shapiro. Our Prime Minister has said that by the 1st of July, he is going to see to it that Israeli law is applied to the Jordan Valley. I want to share some thoughts about the implications of that decision. The benefits are many and very attractive. They include vital and irreplaceable security from having the buffer of the Jordan Valley between us and everything to the east of us. It'll be equity for the residents of Judea and Samaria. They are Israeli citizens now living in an area that is under government and military control. It's not part of the state of Israel. And the realization of the incorporation of an important part of our historic homeland, the land of Israel. Contrary to this, however, as a litany of concerns and anxieties and all kind of doomsayers, many frankly make no sense. Israel will not make such a move without the acceptance, if not the overt endorsement of the United States. Since, since such a step is part and parcel of the Trump deal, it is unlikely that American negativity, at least with the Trump administration, will be a problem. They have their own problems right now. As I'm preparing this program, there are riots all over the United States, so President Trump has his hands full. Now, thinking about the making the Jordan Valley part of Israel, undoubtedly, a lot of people will condemn most anything we do, but their objection really means very little. For example, the European Union, individual Western European countries, the United Nations, the Jordanians, and the Palestinian Authority will all say negative things if we do what we plan to do. The common thread linking all of these who are opposed is essentially their ineffectuality. The European Union will condemn us, but they like our trade, especially in the high-tech sector, and they have become rather reliant on Israeli intelligence to help them thwart domestic terrorism. So the European Union will yell and scream, but it will mean nothing. Jordanians get a huge amount of their water from Israel. They know that we, Israel, stand between them and various forces in the Middle East that would like to kick the Hashemite monarchy out of Jordan. And they control the Temple Mount. We have allowed them to control the Jordanians, to control the Temple Mount, and we have a special relationship with them. The question is, do they really mean to lose all of that if we annex the Jordan Valley? What about the Palestinian Authority? It's threatened to walk away from any kind of negotiation with Israel so many times that no one pays any attention to them anymore. And indeed, right now, they are holding off negotiations. I'll say a few words about that later. For example, the Sunni Arab countries of the Gulf really don't care what the Palestinian Authority thinks. Now, domestically here in Israel, the decision will not be too controversial. This is not to say that many will not support it, all kind of left-wingers here in Israel, but it will not be a big issue, such as leaving in the Gaza back in 2005 proved to be. However, on the individual and national levels, we are okay. So we don't have to worry about what all these different people in these different nations think. They will not love us or hate us any more than they do now. In the meantime, Israel will have created a powerful fait accompli and significant enduring facts on the ground. And I think that is what counts. Now, Prime Minister Netanyahu is under pressure from the Israeli right to apply sovereignty over many portions of the West Bank in the part called Area C. He announced that July would be the date, in particular the Jordan Valley. Now, whether he does so within the context of the Trump peace plan or not, it's presumed that such an annexation plan would include all the West Bank settlements where Jews are living. All those Jewish communities are located in what's called Area C, which is under Israeli military rule. Within the context of Israeli law, such application of Israeli sovereign law can occur very rapidly. Annexation can happen in one moment. That is the moment of the declaration, which can be done by a cabinet decision or a vote in the Knesset, that Israeli sovereignty applies to that territory. Technically, Netanyahu would not need to do more than apply sovereignty through the cabinet, but it's doubtful that he has a majority there, and he has the majority in the Knesset. However, a Knesset vote for sovereignty brings with it enormous amount of symbolism, and the right wing in Israel would want that kind of gesture. More significantly, Knesset approval would be needed for the necessary legislation that must follow annexation. It's that execution and the transformation of the annexed territory from military rule, which is under now, to Israeli sovereignty, which is complicated and time consuming. What will take time is the actual implementation of the Israeli bureaucracy and Israeli law to that area. Past applications of Israeli law, for example, in East Jerusalem after the 1967 war, and on the Golan Heights in 1981 were very different because there were a small number of Israelis in both areas. The annexation of East Jerusalem in 1967 was symbolized the already existing situation. Annexation in the West Bank will be much more complicated because there are more than 430,000 Israelis already residing in that area. I myself have a home there. Their lives are governed by thousands of military rules today, not all of which are necessarily analogous to Israeli law. You have to change from military law to civil law. Unless there was accompanying legislation for the gradual application of Israeli law, business would become illegal and the local councils would be obsolete. With annexation, there will be some kind of legislation that will go along with it, saying that whatever license, whatever permit was done by the civil administration up to now will be considered legal so that everyone will continue to operate normally. Institutional democratic structures had to be developed for those areas, such as court systems. The power of local councils would be expanded, particularly with regard to land appropriation and development. Now, there may be expropriation of land. I don't know. And what we will see in the annexed territory is settlement construction and expansion, which is what we want. Technically, annexation can be reversed, even though a current law was designed to make it difficult to do. At present, sovereignty can be relinquished only with the support of 80 members of Knesset or a referendum among all the people. But if there is enough political power in the Knesset, then the law can be repealed by a 61-member vote. But as time goes by and the population in those territories increases beyond the 430,000 and people become more entwined with Israeli law, it would become harder to rescind the rights of citizens within that system. In addition, residents of those areas have many more rights under Israeli sovereign law when it comes to issues of forced evacuation, such as occurred during the Sinai and Gaza withdrawals. The main obstacle with withdrawal is the number of people that would have to be kicked out of there. It's not like it was in Gaza. So I'll say more about this after the break because there's a lot has to be said about it. I can't go into all the subtle points, but I'll try as much as possible to clarify for the listeners what the implication of the application of sovereignty means. It is a very serious and a historical move, has to be done carefully, but as I said, there are all kinds of implications, and I'll speak a little bit more about what they are. I'll be back after the break.
Hi, everyone. This is Andrea Simento from Jerusalem, inviting you to drop everything and join me on my show, Pull Up a Chair. We'll visit this week's quirky stories, meet fabulous guests, and discover my Israel. Together, we'll laugh, shout, and explain the topics that make us say, hey, we've got to talk about that. So get comfortable and pull up a chair with me, Andrea Simento, every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
And me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to The Jay Shapiro Show.
You're back with Jay Shapiro. On the first segment of the program, I was speaking about the implications of annexation of the Jordan Valley by the state of Israel to make it part of the state. I want to interrupt myself just to read an article from the newspaper on Tuesday morning, which said the following. Defense Minister Benny Gantz instructed Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Aviv Kochavi to accelerate preparations for the possibility that Israel will apply its laws to parts of the West Bank after he and Prime Minister Netanyahu spoke with Trump administration officials. Gantz updated Kochavi on diplomatic developments after the calls and told him to speed up preparations for diplomatic steps on the agenda in the Palestinian arena, unquote. In other words, the government has told the army to be prepared to the reactions, the possible reactions that will come, particularly from the Palestinians, if indeed Israel annexes the Jordan Valley on July 1st or shortly after. So I just interrupted my general background conversation to say what's happening now, that apparently the government is making all the preparations necessary in the event that there will be an annexation on the 1st of July, and there will be negative responses from the Palestinian population. Now I want to get back to the what I was speaking about before, which is the general background about annexation. At this time, at this moment, we don't know exactly what Netanyahu is going to do. It could be that he will announce a unilateral annexation of large parts of the territory or smaller areas in Area C, which has Israeli settlements. He'd also just make a declaration without doing anything on the ground. Nobody knows yet. Unlike previous cases, there could be a lot of disturbances. What are the previous cases? Like moving the American embassy, when no one really paid much attention to it. Any unilateral moves like annexation could get a very negative response. And you have to keep in mind, until now, there's been cooperation and coordination between Israel and the Palestinian Authority, beginning with the Oslo Accords that go all the way back to September 1993. Both the Palestinian Authority and the IDF, the Israeli Army, see the security cooperation, which includes counterterrorism operations, free movement for Palestinian security forces, and an effort to maintain stability in the West Bank. This is for 20 some years, there has been relative stability. Now, the cooperation could be at risk, and is a very short period given to the defense establishment to prepare for any kind of violence that might occur. So some people have said there's not enough time to get ready. In the meantime, as I quoted a moment ago, the head of the army has been told to prepare for whatever could happen upon annexation, which, as I said, could come as early as the 1st of July. There are reports that the Israeli army, is preparing to implement a battle plan which will see the army deploy thousands of troops as reinforcements to the area should violence erupt. Dozens of scenarios have been discussed with senior officers, according to the reports, and the military will really go into overdrive in the coming weeks in order to ready itself for whatever may happen on the 1st of July. By the way, even now, violence against Israeli army troops has been on the rise in Judea and Samaria, and over a dozen attacks have taken place over the last several weeks. Now, various Israeli military experts warned that while most Palestinians in the West Bank have experienced relative stability in recent years, escalation is inevitable since youth are facing increasing unemployment and they didn't live through the second intifada like their parents did. So we now have this new declaration by Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, in which he abrogated all the Palestinian Authority commitments to its political agreements with Israel, including security cooperation. So this, of course, has aroused concern both among Israelis and Palestinians. Israeli media has reported that while the Palestinian Authority has severed ties with Israel, it has also relayed messages to Israel saying that it would prevent widespread chaos and not allow for violence against Israelis. Now, everything that is happening now is on top of a different situation which is happening, and that is grave economic crisis in the West Bank. It's compounded by the coronavirus crisis, as well as political instability, and the fact for the last 25 years the Palestinian Authority has not provided enough jobs for its own people, and tens of thousands of Palestinians cross into Israel every day in order to make a living and support their family. Now, there has been in the past, the cooperation between Israel and the Palestinians is broken down before, such as during the Second Intifada, when suicide bombings and shootings and stonings and lynchings and rocket attacks were commonplace, and that more than 1,000 Israelis were killed and more than 4,000 Palestinians were killed. Now, it's true that Israel and the Palestinian Authority have shared interests in continuing security cooperation. However, on top of all of this, there is the threat of Hamas wresting power from the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank. Remember, after the Oslo Agreement, the Palestinian Authority was supposed to have control of the Gaza area and the center of the West Bank. What happened was that about 15 years ago already, I don't remember exactly which year, Hamas violently threw the Palestinian Authority out of Gaza, killing hundreds of members of the Palestinian Authority government and their armed forces. Hamas took over. Now, these two Palestinian groups, the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, have struggled for power with each other since way back in 1987. And the animosity between them has only increased in recent years. The annulment of security coordination by the head of the Palestinian Authority raises the chance of Hamas operating in the West Bank and attacking not only Israelis, and they would attack Israelis in order to delegitimize the Palestinian Authority, but they would also attack the Palestinian Authority, as indeed they did in Gaza when they violently forced them out. In other words, one of the possible scenarios of Israel annexing the Jordan Valley is that there would violence would erupt by Palestinians against Israel, and also violence among the Palestinians, where Hamas would eventually force out the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank, as they did in the Gaza Strip. In other words, if there's going to be a struggle for power between the Palestinian Authority and Hamas, the chances are that Hamas would win, and then we would have Hamas in Gaza and Hamas in the West Bank facing Israel. Now, that is not a particularly pleasant scenario to think about, but it could happen. On top of all this, you have the issue of Jordan. Jordan's King Abdullah warned that Israel annexing settlement blocks could not only cause an increase in regional extremism, but it could lead to war with the Jordanian kingdom. Now, I personally don't know if that would come about, because I think Jordan is more worried about being attacked from Iraq and from other Arab countries than fighting around with Israel. It's a tough situation. Both Jordan and Israel understand that should security ties fail, not only will King Abdullah face instability at home, but the violence could spill over the border to Israel. And that border has been pretty quiet, really quiet, and safe for the last 25 years. So the whole situation as of July 1st is going to be something that's very difficult to predict, and all kinds of experts are predicting all kinds of things, and it's hard to know, of course, what will happen. We live in a very unstable area of the world, and the truth of the matter is that Israel has always taken steps that would appear to lead to more instability, but have not always resulted that way. So this is a very difficult time, and Israel has to prepare itself for any possibility, any scenario. I'll be back here.
Leap of Faith with Penina Taylor.
We live in the age of information, but not inspiration. If you're like me, you're looking to be inspired to reach higher, to connect more, and to grow. Well, if you want to get warm, you need to stand close to the fire. And if you want to catch fire, you need to stand close enough to get hit by the sparks. Join me, Penina Taylor, as we walk with people who have embarked on a spiritual journey towards Torah. We'll uncover what started them on their journey and what truths they discovered along the way. So prepare to be inspired as we take a leap of faith every Sunday at 5 p.m. on Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to The Jay Shapiro Show.
You're back with Jay Shapiro, In the first two segments of the program this week, I spoke about the implications of the annexation of the Jordan Valley after June 1st by the Israeli government. Now, I want to get away from that subject and do sort of a under the radar type of thing, in which I take various articles and items about the Jewish world, and I want to share them with the listeners because they're like under the headlines. You don't hear much about them. And the first one is one which I believe is absolutely mind-blowing. It was reported in the newspaper on Tuesday morning, and I quote what it says: "A number of kosher stores and synagogues were vandalized and looted in the uptown Los Angeles neighborhood of Fairfax between Saturday night and Sunday morning by people protesting police brutality following the killing of an African American in Minnesota." Now that's the first paragraph of the article. The wording itself is ironic. They vandalized and looted synagogues because of a killing in Minnesota. In addition, I go back to the article, in addition to destruction and graffiti inflicted upon the synagogues, a number of kosher restaurants, bakeries, and stores were ransacked by protesters, looting much of the merchandise and causing extensive property damage. And then the article goes along to list some of the bakeries and Jewish markets that were vandalized in Los Angeles in a protest against the killing of a black person in Minnesota. Now, if you guys listening can figure out the relationship between kosher restaurants and synagogues in Los Angeles and a killing in Minneapolis, then you can send me an email explaining it. It's interesting about how anti-Semitism can rear its ugly head based upon just about every excuse. It's like the old joke where somebody said, all the trouble in the world is caused by the Jews and the left-handed people. So somebody said, why the left-handed people? And the answer is, why the Jews? But apparently that is what's happening. People waiting for an excuse to act out their anti-Semitism, and sometimes viciously and in a really destructive way, not just writing signs on synagogues, but actually causing physical damage. This next item, which I'm going to mention, is about as far under the radar as you can get, and it has to do with a subject called Israeli food security. Israel has an ambassador and special envoy for climate change and sustainability. His name is Gideon Bahar, and he works for Israel's foreign ministry. And he was interviewed in the light of this coronavirus, and he said that the virus is shaking up the economy, and those in the food industry realize to a certain degree that the status quo of the chain of supply is not safe anymore. At some point, countries might block certain exports in an effort to protect their own population and to supply food to their own people, so they'll keep the food in their own countries, food that Israel imports from other countries. This brings into question the stability of the global supply chain of food. So the question is, could the corona pandemic create a collapse in this system? To what degree is Israel prepared to sustain itself during a possible movement towards isolationism within the world's economy? In other words, there's a lot of food apparently that Israel imports, but maybe the countries that do the exporting are going to decide they don't want to export anymore, and they want to keep the food that they're growing within their own country. So in terms of farmers and local supplies in the food chains, this is really quite important. According to the diplomat, he said a lot of the entities almost shut down when the epidemic started. So a lot of countries just stopped exporting, countries that exported to Israel. So what we have to do is to give local farmers incentives to continue growing or even increase crops. Right now, the Israeli farmers feel pressure to compete with products imported from abroad. So what these local farmers need is incentives in the future. Foreign countries supplying food and agricultural products to Israel may not be able to continue doing so at the current rate, and we'll find ourselves in a broken system. Therefore, Israel needs to buy from Israeli farmers and encourage and give incentives to Israeli farmers and maintain a system that supports them. Right now, we're using products from abroad, but we need to see that we have the ability to support our local and national necessities. This is something that decision makers are apparently not aware of, according to the experts. So food waste makes up a third of our food system. A quarter of what we buy goes to the garbage, and we have to mitigate food waste from a management perspective. And legislation should be enacted to either mandate stores to donate food that's left over at the end of the workday, or put a price on garbage. This is a whole world that, quite honestly, I never thought about till I saw this article in the paper. We rely very heavily on importing food, but it could well be that those countries that do the exporting are going to preserve the stuff for themselves anymore and not send it out. That is a real problem for Israel. This next article has to do with both the Palestinian Authority and the coronavirus. The Ministry of Defense, Israel's Ministry of Defense, has an organization, a unit called Coordination of Government Activities in the Territories. It goes by its initials COGAT, COGAT. This COGAT unit engages in coordinating civilian issues among Israel, international organizations, diplomats, and the Palestinians. Its main mission is to facilitate humanitarian issues and economic and infrastructure projects in the West Bank and also in the Gaza Strip. COGAT, which is part of the Ministry of Defense, mainly uses the accounts that it has to inform Palestinians about the various activities, particularly issuing permits for workers. Patients and merchants are given permits to enter Israel if they need a hospital or to do business. And in the past 3 months, COGAT has used its social media accounts to provide Palestinians with information about the coronavirus pandemic. Now, the Arabic Facebook page of COGAT has more than 600,000 likes, while its Arabic Twitter account has more than 11,000 followers. So the Palestinians keep an eye on COGAT for information that's important to them. Now, what's happened is that right now, an order has been given by the Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. He made a decision to renounce all agreements and understandings with Israel and the United States, including security cooperation. So this campaign has also ordered to Arabs they should stop using the COGAT account. In other words, they should stop getting information which is important to them that COGAT provides. In other words, the Palestinian Authority leadership is willing to cut off its nose to spite its face, particularly in the light of this pandemic. So these Palestinian activists have called on the Palestinian Authority government to block these Kogat accounts. They claim the accounts were being used to obtain information from Palestinians about various issues. So, and the Minister of Communication, the Palestinian Minister of Communication, called on Palestinians not to deal with accounts regardless of the security risk they may incur. In other words, they're willing not to have information about their own health provided by the Israeli government through the Ministry of Defense. They'd rather not have that than to be seen as cooperating with the State of Israel. As I said a moment ago, the leadership, which takes good care of itself, and the Palestinian Authority is willing to have the average Palestinian suffer in order to make some kind of diplomatic or political point. They themselves, the leadership, are well protected and well fed, but they really don't care much about their people. And Israel's been providing help to these people and giving them, for example, permits to come into work and to go to hospitals, and the leadership of the Palestinian Authority is willing to cut this off. That says something about that leadership. Until next time, then, Jay Shapiro, take care of yourself. Let's all try to stay healthy.
If you love Israel News Talk Radio, then you'll love our Facebook page. We keep you up to date on what's happening in Israel, plus little surprise treasures that we don't share on the radio. Go now to follow us on Facebook. Just look for the Israel News Talk Radio Facebook page, and don't forget to subscribe and follow us by clicking on the like button. We post great stuff there that you'll want to share. Israel News Talk Radio on Facebook and Israel News Radio on Twitter.
If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at israelnewstalkradio.com.
Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey, this is Jake in Anchorage, Alaska, and I love listening to all the super interesting interviews and up-to-date information on what's happening in Israel.
Hello, this is Anna King, originally from London, now living in Israel. And what can I say? Israel News Talk Radio is my cup of tea.
My name is Bhaskar. I'm from India, and I love listening because you get to know the truth and wonderful voices from this lovely country.
Mom! Okay, wait a minute. Hi, this is Chava Dax, and I'm calling from the rolling hills of Ma'ale Adumim, just north of Jerusalem. I always listen to Israel News Talk Radio to get all the latest news and commentary and to keep me up to date every day.
This is Sarah Dax from Ma'ale Adumim, and I'm 12. I wish Israel News Talk Radio was boring so my mom wouldn't listen to it all the time. Mom!
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.